Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Whether North Carolina is indeed central to the fight for the control of the U.S. Senate, as many national pundits claim, or South Carolina Governor Haley is already looking past what is being increasingly assumed her gubernatorial reelection, the real work and concern is what policy shifts and adjustments will spring from the Carolinas political landscape this year. Thank you again for joining us on the region's most widely watched program on Carolina business and public policy. On deck, our poli-sci experts will wade into and predict how this year's election could turn out and turn into what? We'll begin in a moment.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded April 25th, 2014. On this week's program featuring elections analysis, Francis DeLuca of the Civitas Institute, Dr. Scott Huffmon of Winthrop University, Dr. Bob Oldendick of the University of South Carolina, and Dr. Susan Roberts from Davidson College. And now, here's Chris Williams.
Hello, welcome to our program. Happy spring and welcome to the midterm elections. It's a beautiful thing, isn't it? Welcome back to all of you. And Francis, good to have you back on the program. Good to be here. Thanks for traveling from Raleigh. Susan, let me start with you. What is different? What is unique about this swath of midterms?
Well, I think it's not different, but it's relatively new, and that is the continued nationalization of these elections. And I think what's unusual about this one is the different strategies. How far will the GOP go in saying this is about affordable care, Obamacare? And I think also it's one that is, people are looking to see if the Republicans can gain control of the Senate. Most people say that the Republicans will not lose the House. And I think it's important when you look at what does this mean for 2016.
Do you think that the Republicans have a chance in the Senate? A real chance in the Senate?
They have a chance. How large of a chance is, I think, up in the air. It's going to pan out with a lot of the elections like North Carolina's. But even if they get control of this, and you got to remember there's a president up there who will veto whatever comes our way. So we're kind of looking one way or another. The Republicans are going to retain control of the House, whether they have control of the Senate or not. It's really going to still be a lot of gridlock for the next 2 years. I'd go back to Susan's point, the nationalization of a lot of these elections with the introduction of money. We saw, I really think, just the tip of the iceberg with these 501c4 organizations in 2012. People figured out how they could use these huge volumes of money, who was willing to contribute now that their names could be shielded. They began building a groundwork that they first started pushing at the national level. They're reorienting those at the state levels, and we are seeing just tons of national money into the state level, and that's just going to start changing the way we, the voters, see the elections.
Right, that's a really important point, because since the Citizens United decision and all the Supreme Court decisions, since then, the pendulum has really swung, and it's kind of almost open season. And we've already seen in South Carolina in some of the primaries, the outside groups have really weighed in, and we're sitting here in early in the spring, really, And we're already talking about the general election, and really the campaign it's been extended and extended and extended. And now with these outside groups, it's really making a difference.
And funny, we're talking about that, and here we are taping this program. The production of this program is actually before the primary in North Carolina, before the primary in South Carolina. So in case we're not talking about that, you'll know why. Francis, talk about the nationalization of elections on a state level. You cannot get around the North Carolina Kay Hagan seat. Everyone is talking about that. And I don't mean just in North Carolina, but clearly a lot of the national money has poured in. That is a battleground. Can we overstate that?
Well, no, pretty much everybody agrees that the path for Republican control of the Senate runs through North Carolina. They don't see many scenarios without winning that seat where Republicans can continue to win enough seats to take over the Senate. But I'd like to, Susan was right. The nationalization of elections is not a new phenomenon. It really started for real in '94 with the Gingrich Revolution, and they nationalized that midterm election. And since then, the midterms have been nationalized, and I think all you're seeing is a continuation of that this year. And like in North Carolina, what I would see is after the primary, the Democrats will be trying very hard to localize the election. They will be trying to separate the
because
election.
They were so good at it when Obama first won?
Well, they nationalized the election for Obama. But now they want to separate themselves from Obama, but maybe too late. You can't go back, I don't believe. I don't think you can now unnationalize the election.
Not in the House elections, they're all going to be national issues because everybody is going to be fighting the Obamacare fight. The Republicans have decided that that's going to be the issue they're after. And I spoke to one congressman a while back, a Republican congressman, who told me that their research folks have either all or almost all of the House Democrats on tape using the "if you like it, you can keep it" line, and they've been searching for those because that's what they plan to run.
Especially in the Palmetto State. Bob and Scott, please weigh in on this. The whole idea of nullification of Obamacare, is that a real idea that could actually happen?
Well, the General Assembly, some members of the General Assembly think it is, but realistically, I don't think that has a chance of passing. But it's the type of thing that is symbolic. It keeps the issue out there, and your base voters, the people that are going to turn out, particularly if somebody's facing a primary challenge, that's something that's going to resonate with them. So that's why that issue keeps coming up in the General Assembly.
Even the bill that was the so-called nullification bill, once they realized, okay, we did have a war about this. You can't nullify anything. It's still called that, but the part that would have any real impact on the Affordable Care Act that could be called nullifying, it all has been stripped out, but it's still called nullification for that very reason. You've got to keep the base excited. They continue to do that so they can say, I'm fighting the good fight, and keep them behind them.
And the Obama administration in North Carolina, people call North Carolina, it has a purple hue to it, not red, not blue. So does whatever Barack Obama does or mean now, does it have the same meaning as it had 4 years ago?
Yes, if anything more, because the elections you will not have the turnout you had in the presidential years. You will now have the people who are excited, and what we see in our polling, and we poll both statewide and in districts, you can pretty much guess which way a district's going by their opinion of the president. If the district has a negative opinion on the president, that district is probably going to vote very heavily Republican. And that's really what's driving this election.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, too, if you look at it, getting back to your question about North Carolina, people have said, the Wall Street Journal, that it's not necessarily about, which is critical to us thinking about it, Kay Hagan and the control of the Senate, but also as a proxy for what's going on within the Republican Party, the Tea Party versus the Boehner Republicans, and that's, again, why there's even more attention on North Carolina. And to see if Tillis is not Tea Party and some of his competitors for the nomination are Tea Party. And I think if we look at that, and the president's performance and job approval are really a proxy for the midterm elections. What has the president done? Is this a referendum?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not new, but I think it's going to be more pronounced now because of the spotlight on Obamacare.
How would you, in North Carolina, how would you describe the risk that Kay Hagan is in that seat? And how much of a chance that the Republicans could take control? Why are you smiling and nodding?
We just got poll numbers back on Wednesday, and Kay Hagan is still well over 50% of likely voters in North Carolina think that it's time to give someone else a chance. And Hagan's numbers are in the low 30s.
Doesn't matter who comes out of the primary?
Doesn't really matter if they have the resources to run a credible campaign. And Tom Tillis will probably be the nominee and will have the resources to run a credible campaign.
And I also think, too, she's got a nice war chest, and people are looking at that. But I'm not sure the ads worked during the NCAA about the brackets and the Koch brothers. Pew studies and things say Americans are just not that interested in campaign finance. And I think the little stream of, aren't you afraid, look who's funding these ads against Tom Tillis, against Kay Hagan, I'm just not sure that's going to hold water.
I always say their billionaires are bad, our billionaires are good.
Yeah. And to pick up on a little of that thing that was mentioned about the kind of the struggle within the Republican Party, we see a little bit in the Lindsey Graham race in that, he's facing 6 challengers, all of which are more conservative. We're not sure which one of those is going to emerge and if there will be a runoff election, but if there's forced a runoff and if that's very close or there's an upset which we're not envisioning right now, then it says a whole lot about what's going on in that overall battle. Again, talking about does that reflect what's going on nationally? So that's a theme that we'll look at in South Carolina as well.
Well, in primaries, the most passionate are the ones who are most likely to turn out. The people who say, well, I'm a member of this party but not a strong one, tend not to turn out. And, in South Carolina, even among Republicans, the Tea Party makes up less than, 13%. And now that's hundreds of thousands of people, but then 60% of Republicans agree with Tea Party principles. So the ones who are most likely to turn out are the ones who are most likely to turn out a second time if there is a runoff. And so that plays into it. And back to what France said, when you look at likely voters now, that's a very different entity than who's going to be likely voters then. So you have this moving sampling frame. Yeah. The people who we can clearly identify in polls as likely voters this far out from the election, the question is, will they end up driving the attitudes of people who, 3-4 weeks out are still likely voters? And sometimes that happens, but then sometimes something happens later in the campaign that, changes the opinions of the people who become likely voters only in the last 2 months. Before the election. And so that's why, accurate polling is really, really important to make sure your sampling frames is kind of moving along with public opinion. And that's why they're not sure in a lot of these marquee races who to be targeting. Is this going to be an election I can win by getting the people who are currently undecided, or is this an election I have to win simply on my base?
Well, I think about the primaries very quickly. Is it heart versus head? You're going to go and you support your ideology, or are you going to say, will this candidate, perhaps a Tea Party candidate, be electable again? And I don't think that's a consideration.
Does the rise? Sorry, Susan, but does the rise of the unaffiliated voter in a primary, is that a meaningful dynamic now?
I would say not really, because I think that some of the primary voters are not. They're the people that are the party faithful. They're paying attention, and the unaffiliated. Some of which people think the independents, as we all know, are the bright, motivated, really they weigh the issues, and most of the time they're the cohort with lowest turnout, and they're really just not that interested in politics. But it has to be addressed because we look at the growing number of defectors from either party.
Well, the more people who declare themselves unaffiliated, then that means, especially in North Carolina, where you do declare by party, that just leaves the purest of the pure in your party turning out to vote, and that can have a secondary ripple effect on what the vote's like.
And what we also see, the unaffiliated voters, really they're just partisans without the title.
Right.
You poll them and you can say these people are Republican, these people are Democrats, these people are truly independents or unaffiliated.
And it's only usually about 10%,
right?
At best, because most are leaners.
The breakdown usually reflects what the party registration is and actually.
Any of you surprised by the sustainability, or let's call it the staying power of the Tea Party?
Well, in the face, I would have to say, as a conservative and kind of a supporter of the Tea Party, I'm surprised that they're able to hold the numbers they do in the face of the media onslaught. Who would want to be a member of a group that believes all these terrible things that the Tea Party believes and that treats people the way the Tea Party treats them, if you listen to the media?
Well, and I think, too, and not knowing, I always say people that identify with the Tea Party, maybe they're not a factor in winning elections, but they have been a factor in shaping the agenda, which I think is just as effective, if not more so.
They're also important to campaigns because they are the grassroots activists. That's what the Tea Party did for the Republican Party, was provide the workers that the unions provided for the Democratic Party. That was kind of a rebirth of Republicans.
And that's the other question. That's the follow. Bob, and I know you were going to say something, but when does the Democratic Party have a Tea Party, so to speak? When do they have a splinter group that splits the Democrats? Does it ever happen? Do you see it happen? It's not an issue?
It could happen, but it's not on the immediate horizon because there's just not that type of issue that I think is going to divide them that way. I think we see a little bit, if we look at Elizabeth Warren and kind of the power that she seems to be gaining in the Senate and maybe making some noises about running in 16, there are some of the more liberal activists that are starting to say, well, maybe we should be pushing a little more harder, but I really don't see anything in the near future.
Yeah.
Well, I think you are kind of seeing that in the North Carolina Democratic Party. It's William Barber's attempt to kind of become the de facto party for the Democratic Party has kind of fallen apart, and William Barber has stepped into that vacuum.
We've seen it in the National Democratic Party a few times. You go back to Humphrey and other, and you had wings within the party separating out, and then, it went too far one way, and so they had the Hunt Commission to bring sort of the official sort of mainstream Democrats back in. But the Democratic Party has always been a bigger tent. So there have always been more squabbling, but it was more smaller groups just yapping at each other. Whereas the Republican Party, while there were differences of opinion, it was comparatively more homogenous. And this is the first time where you've had an organized voice. And you asked about the staying power of the Tea Party. One of the issues with the Tea Party is no one was kind of galvanizing it in a good way, an organized way to make use of it until after it was needed. You go back and you look at the presidential primary, and you had Tea Party organizations in South Carolina standing up saying, well, we're the Tea Party for Newt Gingrich. No, we're the other Tea Party. We're for Bachman. No, we're the real Tea Party, and we're from Santorum. So, that sort of disorganization made people wonder, are they still going to be around? And my argument has always been this, and I've always used this analogy. It's a lot like electroplating. They are floating in the solution out there. And to electroplate, you run a charge through the wire and it gloms on. And the Tea Party, those attitudes are out there floating. All it really takes is somebody to run the proper charge through the wire, and they will organize and come in. And that's their strength. But timing is everything. And timing was not good for them in the last election cycle. They spent too much time in the primaries fighting against each other.
But they've added that verb, to primary someone, and I think that is essential. I look at sometimes like coffee, the Tea Party.
Yeah.
You wait 2 years and they're going to say coffee's bad for you. You wait another year, it's good for you. I mean, the death of the Tea Party, the resurrection of the Tea Party. I'm not sure exactly where we stand now in terms of a Tea Party agenda or
whether coffee's good or bad.
Is good or bad.
Right.
I'm going to always say good. But
one of the things I think that contributed to the staying power is you think about when the rise really came. It was after the Affordable Care Act and really associated with that and the increasing power of the federal government. And since the Affordable Care Act discussion has continued, it's continued that dynamic. And we see in the Lindsey Graham race, there are 6 candidates opposing him, a number of whom could be characterized as Tea Party and have different Tea Party support,
right.
And they haven't decided which one is that going to be.
So Bob, if Barack Obama in his first term would have been more magnanimous or maybe more inclusive about what Affordable Care Act was going to look like, should have looked like, reached across the aisle, and there would have been a little bit more of dialogue, do you think the Tea Party would be in existence?
I think if anything would have passed with the individual mandate, that piece itself was really what's kind of spurred things. You can't make us do something. I think that is the thing. Because
don't tread on me.
Because when we pull on the Affordable Care Act and ask about all the other, everybody says, yeah, this is good that children can stay on until they're 26, and you can't be kicked off because of a condition. But when you get to the individual mandate, it all falls apart.
Yeah.
I think the tea's getting a little cold, but just to remember, the Tea Party wasn't really the ACA. It was a result of the stimulus bill. Rick Santelli and his rant on CNBC was in response to the big, massive thing of federal spending. Really, that's what galvanized the Tea Party. It was about the massive spending and debt left to children and grandchildren. I think that really, for the average American, and because the ones I talked to, that's what they really cared about. Now, the ACA, which came after that, really also worry them about the growth of federal government and the control over their individual lives and freedoms and the Constitution. That kind of became another issue in the set of
Well,
issues.
anger can't be, the flames of anger can't continue to burn hot unless it's being constantly fueled like anything. So, you had to, the people have forgotten mostly about the stimulus unless you ask them, and then they dredge it up and they go, oh yeah, and then they can recall their attitudes. But, you keep adding one thing after another, and the Tea Party has been very good about finding the next thing to be angry about.
No
to
lack
keep
of them.
There's no lack of things they're angry about to keep those fires burning.
Does the focus in all the hoopla and all the talk about the North Carolina Senate races, Lindsey Graham's seat, I mean, does the glare of that just diminish what is actually going on in the congressional races?
Well, I guess I could say that most of the time those are the people running the ads. And if there's this barrage of money from at the Senate races and national, that trickles down. And they're going to get the spotlight on all the congressional races are inextricably linked to the Senate races, because that's where all the money's going in and that's where the themes are going in. I don't know that it diminishes it, but if we look at, it's a whole nother show to talk about redistricting. But, I think that's a factor in which, people aren't as vulnerable as they used to be in any district.
Right.
Yeah, and I would argue that the biggest impact of the Senate races is if you're spending this much money statewide, you're increasing turnout of one base versus the other. That has a big impact in the congressional races, but even then it just makes the margin of victory larger, because as Susan said, one of the the big subliminal issue that nobody's talking about at this point, but we talked about last year, was the redistricting.
Right. And even if there wouldn't have been as much emphasis on the Graham race as there is, it wouldn't have made that much difference in the congressional races, because Scott and I could have told you a year ago who's going to win those races and what the percentages are going to be. They're just not that competitive. There's really no primary challenge, and I think we can be pretty confident.
Yeah, in the new 7th congressional district in South Carolina,
Is that the Tim Rice seat?
Yes.
I was off by a whopping 0.2 of 1%. I mean, they are pretty set.
Right.
You both have talked about reapportionment. It's come up more than once now. And we got about 3 minutes left, so you're right. It's not going to be fair. We could talk a whole program about that. But that bell has been rung. How do we change reapportionment, or redistricting rather? How does that change now?
Well, personally, we don't believe you do. We believe that redistricting, reapportionment.
So it's okay to draw these lines as erratic as they are?
It is inherently a political process. You cannot depoliticize it. You can call it anything you want. Politics will still be involved in it. Even if you put it to an unelected group, there will still be politics involved. And you can look at what happened in California, in Arizona, and you can see politics was involved in the quote-unquote nonpartisan.
Is there a better way to manage the process?
I would argue that even though it's not, out of the realm of politics, I think if we have a few more election cycles and see what happens in California, to me, if they continue to be more competitive, then that's going to be, I would judge that as better. However, if it just simply means a flip-flopping of whose advantage it is, then no, that's not better. But, to me, anything that takes it, and I care less about depoliticizing it as far as ideologies than I do about taking it out of the hands of the legislature. To me, getting it out of the hands of the legislature,
You mean any legislature,
any
not
state,
just the
state legislatures would be an improvement. But anything, as social scientists, we're going to say, you may think this is better, but we're going to need evidence of a few election cycles. And by then, everybody's forgotten about it.
Right, and the impact of that, if we see more and more safe seats, either for the Republicans or the Democrats, it does have an impact on the primary elections, because if you're in a safe Republican seat, your challenge is not going to come in the general election. It's going to come in the primary from somebody who's probably more conservative than you. So then, if that person gets elected, then we see the Republicans in Congress are increasingly conservative, the Democrats are increasingly liberal, so we get this polarization effect that we see continuously.
Even though the people aren't more polarized, the people are not more polarized, because the people are
And my students get tired of hearing me talk about polarization, but a lot of things are reduced to that.
the leaders. That's right.
1 minute left, very quickly, and I know we're 2 years out, but gosh, we have to ask this question. What do you think 2016 looks like in the White House?
I am wide open. I mean,
Anyone? Up for grabs?
I think anyone can win it. I don't think, we may not know who the next president is.
How strong
right
is
now.
Hillary Clinton in that?
Well, she's going to be, how old will Hillary Clinton be? 69, 71 years old? I mean, you know.
Younger than McCain was when he ran, but that,
Yeah.
it's still old. That was used against McCain.
Well, and I think, too, 2016, if I were a Republican strategist, I'd say, do the Obamacare thing now, because by 2016, the kinks could have worked themselves out. And I think it's wide open as well.
okay.
I couldn't, Bridgegate, I don't know what happens.
Bridgegate. Yeah, we're out of time. How convenient for you all. Thanks for being back on the program. Francis, please come back. It's always a lot of fun. Good to have you here. Thanks for watching. Good to see you, Susan. Thank you for watching our program. Best of luck going forward. If you have any comments or questions, go to our website. Until next week, I'm Chris. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care, when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.